Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and staff who are here. Welcome to this hearing of submissions committee meeting tonight. Nyama, Warranjeri Kulin, Mirambikal Bik Wenoap Daraban, Bagangbal Awit Juri, Bagangukal Nangit Bambuth Ba Yellingbu. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land Darebin Council stands and pay my respects to elders past and present. Membership of this meeting is as listed in the agenda. We have an approved leave of absence from Councillor Suzanne Newton. There are no other apologies that I've received. I think everyone else is here. Disclosures of conflict of interest. Councillors, are there any conflicts to disclose? No, we'll move on. Confirmation of the minutes of the previous hearing of submissions committee meeting. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, and seconded Councillor Greco. All those in favour? That is carried. That brings us to consideration of reports. 5.1, local law for the protection of trees on private property. Do I have anyone to make a submission? Chris, I'll invite you up. And Mr. Erlandson, we've received your written submission. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chris Erlandson, Preston. The submission I've made, there were a couple of issues that have been addressed, and they were only sort of related to my personal questions. But I am going to sort of continue with other issues that were included, but just at a deeper level. Firstly, I would like to commend Council for initiating the local law to endeavour to protect Darebin's large tree canopy from further decline in numbers. However, I cannot support the local law as it is, as it inspires little confidence of successful outcomes. In my view, more work needs to be done to demonstrate to the community that Council is really serious about this matter. The content of the wording is to the local law is weak, and I feel needs to be strengthened in two different approaches, the carrot and the stick. I say that the proposed maximum $2,500 fine is inadequate for various reasons. Developers will do business as usual, simply building in this paltry amount as just another cost without any fear of having breached the law. And when compared to $20,000 fines imposed by other councils, I ask, what message is Darebin sending then to the broader community and to developers in particular? Is it that we in Darebin actually value our trees less than these other councils? In response to my submission, reference was made that the fine of $2,500 was a maximum amount charged by law in Darebin. I would like to think that Council will take the necessary steps to address this point before the law is enacted. Also, in my view, I think there is the need for consistency with what other councils are doing on these like issues. The other concern for me is how effectively this law can be enforced and who will do the detection and enforcing, particularly on weekends and after hours when we know that illegal tree lopping by cowboy operators usually occurs. Presumably, Council may be relying on neighbours or others to dob in offenders. On this point, Council's response to my submission was that Council officers will have a patrol presence in our neighbourhoods and in parks on weekends for animal-related call-outs, and that availability could, mind you, could be negotiated for tree-related matters. So there's nothing definite there. Unfortunately then, this response to me makes this law sound more like a Clayton's law. That is the law you have when you don't really want to have one. So at this stage, it seems we don't know how the law will be enforced, if there will be a clear process or even a phone number for guaranteed rapid response out of hours. It should also be noted too that what the community originally requested was a significant tree register to identify significant trees that absolutely cannot be touched. It may be more effective to develop such an approach to support the local law and to give it more teeth. To conclude, I think that Council needs to considerably increase the fine and be a lot more proactive to make this local law a deterrent and respected by everyone by heightening the risk of consequence for offenders getting caught. Thank you. I'll just want to add one other thing too. That is my submission, but there's another issue that's occurred to me, and it was only today. But you know, if I have a neighbour who's I know that he's owned the place for the site for 7 years, and over that time, he's lopped 2 what I would call significant trees. Now, here we've got another example of where the council's a little bit sort of toothless in their ability to do anything about this. Now, I know he wants to develop it and he's preparing for a development, but, you know, the council is just saying, well, you know, what can we do about it? But this is another example of where trees are being taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erlandson. We have another submitter, I believe it's Mr. Tony Sullivan. Please come up and make your submission.
Tony Sullivan, Reservoir. My presentation will be relatively short, but I think the points need to be considered seriously. In its current form, the new regulation places a financial impost on property owners in it that requires a payment of a $200 fee to council, then the additional burden of having to pay a qualified arborist to perform any work on a tree that falls under the guidelines. This burden will hit those homeowners who can least afford it, particularly those on the age pension or other Centrelink payments, like myself, who's unemployed. And if I wasn't unemployed, I wouldn't have been able to come here because the meeting's too early. It makes no distinction between trees of significance and those that in other jurisdictions are considered weeds, i.e. pine trees and pitostrums. It is an unacceptable interference in the rights of property owners to manage their property as they see fit. If I have the right to plant trees on my property, I surely have the right to remove or replace them without council dictating what I can and cannot do. The council has for many years now failed to ensure that any new developments implement the vegetation plans provided with the planning permit applications. My wife and I have had to contact council numerous times in the past to get them to enforce the planting specified in applications. I'm referring in particular to a next door neighbour who concreted rather than planted trees and was really annoyed with us because we forced him to cut the concrete and, well, you did, cut the concrete and put the trees that he was supposed to put in the first place. I contend the council would achieve far better outcomes if they actually enforced the vegetation plans put forward by developers in their planning applications. On a personal example, I currently have a tree whose roots have impacted the paving on my driveway. On my reading of the new regulations, as the combined circumference of the offending tree is 1.5 metres, I would need to obtain an arborist report at my expense, submit an application for a permit to remove the roots damaging the driveway, $200, and then employ a qualified arborist to then remove the roots again at my expense. Further on the point of monitoring, our street is notoriously bad for parking violations. You don't monitor the parking, whether it's during business hours, after hours, weekends, whatever. And in actual fact, you've actually modified the parking to make it even worse. And finally, I believe a tree register of those trees that are of significance should be instituted, and those trees should be protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission, Mr O'Sullivan.
Thank you.
There are no further submitters here to make a submission tonight, so is there a motion? Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation that is listed in the council report, in the hearing of submissions report that councillors will have in front of them.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Greco. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just speak briefly to the recommendation, just so that we're all clear in relation to the next steps. The recommendation, as listed in the report, notes that that we, of course, as per the local law provisions, and of course also in relation to our responsibilities under the Local Government Act, will be taking on board the submissions that have been received both in writing and also in relation to the submissions that have been presented to us this evening. In relation to these submissions, a further report will be presented to Council, which will be part of our consideration in relation to adopting the proposed local law or not, and taking into account any changes that may be recommended as well. Finally, I'd just like to thank both the submitters this evening who have presented to us and the time that they've taken in preparing their statements and also their written submissions, and also to thank all of the submitters who have taken the time to engage in this process. And finally, also to a big thank you to our officers and to the community that has voiced their interest in this issue over many years. So I'll end it there, and basically we are in a hearing of submissions process. This is not the decision-making time in this process. This is hearing submissions, and I'm sure we'll take on board all the thoughts and considerations and issues raised, and hopefully come to an appropriate outcome in due course.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to add a few comments to what Councillor McCarthy has said. Firstly, I think that the submitters and the submissions that I've seen have really given us some food for thought, particularly around the issues of cost associated with the implementation of or the future possible implementation of the bylaw, and particularly in relation to the impact that it has on our residents. Also, I think the issues of enforceability, I think they're valid points that need to be considered, and something that we would need to have some understanding on if we are to go down this path of how we actually would implement a policy of such a nature, and to ensure that it's actually fully implemented. So I really thank the considered views that have come forward in the form of submissions, and I think that they will be a great help in informing to improve the future of this policy before it comes to Council for endorsement.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? No. There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of the matters under consideration tonight. Once again, I thank members of the community and the gallery for coming to make your submissions, and we'll keep you informed as to the next steps. Thank you, councillors.